I wouldn't say Wilkie is all that technical in his fencing, but he is certainly effective. He excels in a lot of fundamental principles of fencing, such as reading the fight and closing measures safely, and in a way that results in a pretty low proportion of double hits. I do have some critiques, or what I see as disadvantages to his approach to fencing, that I think could be improved upon. But overall, I admire a lot of aspects of his fencing, and believe there is a lot we can learn from these examples. So let's begin with the most common technique Wilkie uses. We see Wilkie enter with a right overhow, bind, and the moment he feels contact with his opponent's weapon, he leaves the bind and launches a left overhow. In this example, we see Wilkie in the knock, but he comes up into hang-in, but again the moment he feels contact from his opponent, he launches a strike to the left. These next three clips show Wilkie in flug, and he launches a thrust in defense, but again, as soon as he makes contact with his opponent's weapon, he makes a strike to the left. This is such a dominant technique in Wilkie's fencing that even in prolonged exchanges, you just see a rinse and repeat approach to the fight. Bind, strike to the left, if it didn't work, re-enter, bind, then strike to the left again. Continue until someone yells hold. You see some slight variation, but it is essentially the same technique. Despite being repetitive, it is surprisingly effective. These next two examples show how he tries to force the bind. You see him throw his sword out horizontally, baiting his opponent into throwing an overhow. He applies psychological pressure by continuing to advance. He pops into hang-in to defend himself. When he gets the bind he wants, he tries to leave the bind to strike to the left. We also see him throwing cuts out of measure. If he doesn't get the bind he wants, he resets and tries again. Essentially all he did was thrust out from flug into Langenort, and the moment he felt his opponent's sword, he went weak in the bind and then made a strike to the left. Now this technique makes up 45% of all the exchanges I observed from Wilkie. Considering he has been consistently climbing the HEMA rankings, I would say this technique is effective, and considering he has a fairly low proportion of double hits, 62 doubles per 1,000 exchanges, I would say this technique is pretty safe. But I do have one significant critique. Oftentimes, in order to target his opponent's right side with a left overhow, he shifts his point of balance quite dramatically to the left. I feel like he gets away with this as he is a big guy and is therefore more difficult to knock down, but this really isn't an ideal position from which to continue the fight. I think of the Fiore Virtue of the elephant with the castle on its back. Then I imagine people in that castle, and how many people would fall out if that platform was no longer upright and stable. So I mentioned that 45% of the observed exchanges were that single technique, but what about the other 65%? Well, you have some hand sniping, knee sniping, and even a little bit of half swording. As far as thrusts go, he does quite well at protecting himself against his opponent's cut as he executes his thrust. I will note, however, that he does telegraph a bit with a little bob right before he makes a thrust. I also saw some really cool blade grabs. You can see as the moment he enters the bind, he recognizes he is in the close game, and immediately takes control of his opponent's weapon before ending it with a thrust to the abdomen. In this clip, we see him go into a high bind in the close game, but as soon as he grabs his opponent's weapon, he brings it down to his core to better utilize his strength before spinning out of it, yanking the sword out of his opponent's hand. Really great body mechanics. Wilkie goes to grapple quite often, and it usually works out quite well for him. I have to say though that his grappling style resembles that of a bulldozer, as he plows into his opponents and uses his physical strength to force them into submission. So unless you are adept at manipulating momentum in grappling, or are yourself quite strong, I wouldn't suggest trying to match strength with strength against Mark Wilkie. The most effective strategy I saw against his attempts to grapple was to keep moving back and trying to create distance while keeping your weapon back to prevent the blade grab. Despite the few critiques I pointed out, like leaning dramatically to the left and telegraphing a bit, I think Mark Wilkie is a great fencer, and his fencing can be a useful learning tool. Be sure to give your fight analysis scores for Mark Wilkie by following the link below, or check out the Facebook page to check out my fight analysis scores. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to making the next one.